Subscribe because it's free.
The Galactic Survey Corps had strict protocols regarding Class 15 Deathworlds. Avoid at all costs. These were planets where evolution had gone too far, where nature itself seemed to reject civilization. No species had ever successfully colonized one. No sane species had ever tried. Yet, here they were, approaching one. Captain Viekesh of the Xener Dominion watched the data stream from his ship scanners. The planet below, designated Ragnar 7, was a nightmare given form. Gravity nearly 3 times standard, a toxic atmosphere laced with corrosive elements, temperatures that swung from sub-zero to molten within hours, and life forms so aggressive they hunted in storms. And yet, confirm that reading, Viekesh ordered, his voice sharper than he intended. The navigation officer hesitated before speaking. "Sir, there are structures down there, large ones." That was impossible. No colony ship had been recorded landing here. No distress signals had ever come from Ragnar 7 until now. Yet their sensors didn't lie. A planetary defense grid, orbital stations, and even a fully developed city sat in the middle of this death world. And the architecture was unmistakable. Human. Viekesh muttered. The word sent a ripple through the crew. Humanity was a relatively new species on the galactic stage, and while they were known for their adaptability, this was beyond reason. Even the hardiest races struggled to survive on Class 10 worlds, yet humans had not only endured here but thrived. The ship descended cautiously. The atmosphere rattled against the hull, lightning flashing through the dense clouds like a predator's gaze. As they broke through the storm layers, the city came into full view. It was unlike anything the Xener had ever seen. Brutalist, reinforced, built to withstand extinction itself. Towers of metal and stone, reinforced against the crushing gravity, rose defiantly against the world's fury. Landing was another challenge. The ship's stabilizers strained, and the artificial gravity buffer struggled to compensate. As soon as they touched down, the Xener soldiers moved to disembark until the external scanners blared an alert. They weren't alone. A formation of heavily armed humanoids stood in perfect ranks outside the landing zone. Their weapons weren't raised, but their presence was clear. This was their world. Viekesh stepped forward, heart pounding. His species had conquered dozens of systems, faced all manner warriors, but nothing prepared him for the sight before him. The humans weren't wearing environment suits. Under this gravity, under this atmosphere, they stood with no visible strain. Their armor was reinforced but unsealed, their movements fluid, as if the very laws of physics that threatened to crush any other species were nothing more than a mild inconvenience to them. A figure stepped forward from their ranks, his expression unreadable, save for the barest hint of amusement. He extended a hand. "Welcome to Ragnar 7, the man said. "What took you so long?" Viekesh hesitated before taking the human's hand. Even through his protective suit, he could feel the strength in the grip. It wasn't just firm, it was controlled, precise, like shaking hand with a predator that had chosen not to crush him. The human leader gestured toward a waiting transport. "Governor Elias Rourke." He introduced himself. "I imagine you have questions." The Xener followed cautiously. The armored vehicle moved smoothly across the jagged terrain, navigating an environment that should have been uninhabitable. The city beyond the landing zone loomed larger now, and as they entered, Viekesh's disbelief only grew. Humans walked openly in the streets, carrying supplies, chatting, laughing. Children ran through reinforced corridors, their movements adjusted for the crushing gravity as if it were normal. There were no signs of desperation, no signs of barely scraping by. This was a civilization, not a survival camp. "This is impossible," one of Viekesh's officers muttered. "You should all be dead." Rourke chuckled. "Yeah, we got that a lot in the beginning." He led them into a command center, a fortress within a fortress, walls thick enough to withstand anything short of planetary bombardment. The doors sealed behind them, and Rourke gestured toward a large display, a historical record of humanity's arrival. "We weren't supposed to be here," Rourke admitted. "A colony fleet of 5 ships. Malfunction in the jump drive. We ended up stranded, out of contact, no way to escape. Half our people died in the first 6 months. This planet doesn't forgive mistakes. The screen flickered, showing footage from centuries past. The first colonists struggling against monstrous creatures, acidic storms, and tectonic shifts that reshaped the land. Kesh couldn't look away. Every other species that had attempted colonization under these conditions had perished within weeks. Humanity should have suffered the same fate. Instead, they adapted. We stopped trying to fight the planet. Rourke continued. We learned its patterns, its rhythms, built technology to match its brutality. Massive environmental suits, originally meant for deep space repair, had been modified into powered exoskeletons to handle the gravity. Filtration systems pulled clean air from poison. Their weapons evolved to pierce the hides of creatures that could shrug off starship hulls. More footage. Humans running alongside massive armored beasts, tamed and trained to hunt the apex predators of this world. Soldiers firing into the sky, shooting down creatures with reflexes too fast for normal sentience. The Xener delegation exchanged looks of growing unease. This wasn't just survival. This was mastery. Kesh turned to Rourke. You didn't just endure this world, you conquered it. The human shook his head. Not conquered, he corrected. Became part of it. The governor stepped forward, arms crossed. Now the real question, Captain, why are you here? Kesh hesitated. The truth seemed almost insulting to speak aloud. We thought you needed to be rescued, he admitted. Rourke let out a sharp laugh. Rescue? From what? The question hung in the air, unanswered, because for the first time in his life, Kesh realized there was nothing on this planet more dangerous than the humans who lived on it. A blaring alarm cut through the conversation. Red warning lights flashed across the command center as human officers moved with swift precision. There was no panic, only sharpened focus. Rourke tapped his earpiece. Report. A voice crackled through the comms. Unidentified fleet inbound. No response to hails. Design matches Zyphar Dominion. The room tensed. Even Kesh felt a surge of dread. The Zyphar were a brutal, expansionist species. They didn't negotiate. They conquered, enslaved, and eradicated anything that resisted. Kesh turned to Rourke. You have to evacuate. The Zyphar don't take prisoners. Rourke arched an eyebrow. Neither do we. He gestured toward the massive display as tactical feeds lit up. The Zyphar fleet had already entered orbit. 20 warships, fully armed, moving in formation. The usual sign of an overwhelming planetary invasion. A transmission came through. The sneering face of Commander Drogan filled the screen, his crimson battle scars glowing under the harsh lighting. I commend your defiance, humans, he said mockingly. A Class 15 Deathworld. Truly a fitting grave. Surrender now, and I may let some of you live. Rourke sighed, rubbing his temples as if this were a minor annoyance. Then he cut the transmission mid-sentence. Kesh's mandibles twitched in disbelief. You just... Rourke shrugged. I don't negotiate with people who are already dead. The Zyphar ships began their descent, their dropships streaking through the atmosphere like falling stars. A standard planetary invasion tactic. Break the defenders before the ground forces landed. It was a mistake. A new tactical overlay appeared on the display. The Zyphar fleet's maneuvers slowed as their ships struggled against Ragnar 7's brutal gravity wells. The storm surged, throwing erratic bursts of lightning through their formations. Their shields flickered, destabilized by the atmospheric interference humans had long since adapted to. Then the planetary defense grid activated. Massive automated railguns emerged from beneath the surface, their barrels glowing as they fired hypervelocity slugs at near-relativistic speeds. The Zyphar warships, built for space engagements, couldn't dodge in time. Explosions ripped through their hulls as ships shattered under the force of gravity-enhanced projectiles. Kesh's jaw tightened. You have orbital weapons? Of course, Rourke said. You think we just sat here and hoped for the best? But the real horror was happening on the ground. Zyphar dropships that managed the land were immediately under siege. Their troops rushed out, expecting helpless civilians or untrained resistance. Instead, they met the Deathworld itself. The sky darkened as massive winged predators, each the size of a gunship, swooped down, tearing apart anything that moved. The ground trembled as titanic, armor-plated creatures erupted from underground burrows, their razor-sharp appendages slicing through sci-fi formations like paper. Then the humans attacked. They weren't just soldiers. They were hunters, survivors, killers forged by the deadliest environment in the galaxy. Their weapons were precision-calibrated for high-gravity combat. They moved with unnatural speed, their reinforced bodies conditioned to withstand forces that would crush lesser beings. A Zyphar platoon fired at an approaching human unit. The rounds connected, but the humans kept moving. Their armor, engineered from the same materials that withstood this planet's elements, shrugged off the damage. One soldier leapt through the air, closing an impossible distance in seconds. His blade sliced through Zyphar armor like it was paper. The battle was over before it began. Zyphar forces that weren't slaughtered by the wildlife were cut down by the humans. Those that tried to retreat found their extraction ships crushed under the weight of their own failing gravity stabilizers. Commander Drogan's last transmission was a scream, cut short as something massive tore through his command vessel. And just like that, it was over. Viekesh stood frozen, watching the carnage in silence. The Zyphar had been one of the most feared warlords in the galaxy, and they had been nothing more than prey here. Rourke exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Well, that was fun. Viekesh turned to him, voice barely above a whisper. What are you? Rourke smiled. Human. The battlefield was silent. Smoke rose from the shattered remains of the Zyphar warships, their once imposing forms now nothing more than twisted wreckage. The air smelled of scorched metal and ozone, a stark contrast to the untamed wilderness of Ragnar 7. Viekesh's mind struggled to process what he had just witnessed. The Zyphar were not just defeated, they were eradicated. A force that had subjugated entire star systems had lasted mere minutes against the humans of this Deathworld. Rourke turned to his officers. Clean up the mess. Salvage what's useful, dump the rest. His people moved with methodical efficiency, stripping weapons, armor, and technology from the fallen Zyphar. There was no celebration, no unnecessary cruelty, just cold, ruthless practicality. Viekesh finally found his voice. You do this often? Rourke smirked. Not as often as we'd like. But every so often, some idiot thinks they can take what's ours. He gestured toward the wreckage. We don't start fights. We just make sure no one gets a second chance. The Xener delegation exchanged uneasy glances. Viekesh had seen empires rise and fall, had fought in campaigns that lasted decades. Yet, he had never seen anything like this. A species that had not only survived the deadliest environment imaginable, but had become something more because of it. Rourke must have seen the troubled look on his face. He clapped Viekesh on the shoulder, a human gesture of reassurance or dominance. He wasn't sure which. I get it, Rourke said. You expected us to be struggling, barely hanging on. He gestured to the thriving city behind him. But this? He grinned. This is just home. Viekesh inhaled sharply. This was no struggling colony. No desperate survivors clinging to life. This was a fortress world, a human stronghold, forged in the crucible of a planet meant to kill everything that set foot on it. And then the realization struck him. The galactic community had always debated the upper limit of human adaptability. They had seen humans survive hostile planets, deadly climates, and war zones that no other race could endure. But this was different. The humans hadn't just adapted to Ragnar 7. They had become it. The Zyphar had made a critical mistake. They thought they were invading a world filled with humans. They never realized they were invading a Class 15 Deathworld that could fight back. Viekesh took a step back, a deep, instinctual fear settling into his bones. The galaxy didn't understand what humanity truly was. But soon they would.